Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the GFOI Information Exchange for 2025. Today's session is on Africa. My name is Tom Harvey, and I'm the manager of the GFOI office, and I have the pleasure of being your host for today. Thank you very much for joining us. As many of you may know from past years, the GFOI Information Exchange is an opportunity to hear from what GFOI's development partners have been doing in collaboration with countries from each of the three regions. So this week we have three calls. Today is on Africa, and tomorrow we have one on Asia Pacific, and then later in the afternoon, one on from Latin America. So it's a pleasure to be with you today. I think most people are familiar with the features of Zoom webinar by now, but just to let you know, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box, and our presenters will do their best to answer those as we go. We're going to have three speakers today. We have had a couple of last minute cancellations due to illness and what have you, so we have a bit more time to spare. We're going to start off with our FAO colleague Remy D'Annunzio, followed by my World Bank colleague Naikoa, and then my colleague from the GFO Office's CLP team, Peter Moore. And then we'll go to the group Q&A at the end. So we have plenty of time. Please feel free to ask your questions via the Q&A box, and any other information you wish to know from the team, you can pop that into the chat, but questions in the Q&A box. So, I forgot to mention, the intro music was by a good Australian folk musician, Xavier Rudd. I hope you all enjoyed that. We'd like to play a little bit of music at the start to get everybody relaxed and in the zone to absorb information. So I hope you enjoyed that. But now I'll pass over to my colleague Remy to provide an update on FAO's activities in Africa. Remy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Can you confirm you can hear me fine?
Quickly.
Okay, I'll also share my screen, and can you confirm that you can see this in with the right?
Perfect.
Right. Oops.
Good.
Okay. So thanks again. Hi everybody. It's good to be in the meeting today. I'm Remy, Forestry Officer in FAO. I'm based in Rome in the headquarters, and I will try to give a quick update about the activities we do on monitoring forests within the forestry division. So let me move to my first slide just to mention that within the forest monitoring team, we have different areas of work that span quite a large range. Historically, we've been working on NFI and on MRV functions for REF+ mechanisms and associated carbon schemes. We are now expanding for the past 2-3 years on other areas like deforestation, free supply chains, and restoration in particular. So I will try to touch base on those different aspects of the work we're doing and in which countries we do this in Africa. So first, I don't know if this has been on the radar of everyone, but we launched this at the last GFOI exchange in November last year, a dashboard to follow up on different submissions to UNFCCC and in particular on reference levels and reports. So we used to have those regular publications. We now have a very interactive, very easy to manipulate dashboard where you can see aggregated results. I show here the results that we can do when you filter the region by Africa, for instance, and it shows you a really good snapshot of each of the submissions and with links inside. So I really encourage you to look at those. Specifically, what happened over the past year and a half in terms of MRV. I put here the main countries that FAO has supported and the submissions that have been happening. So Côte d'Ivoire, they did its UNFCCC reference level and submitted the monitoring reports to the FCPF. Congo has also submitted a updated reference level, as well as Sudan scaling up from regional to national. Ghana has been active on the FCPF front side and art trees with 3 monitoring reports and the first report to art trees. News from Uganda that they are presenting a funding proposal to the next GCF boards, including their achieved emission reductions. So we really look forward to this. On countries that have not been supported by FAO that still submitted work to the FCPF, we have Congo, DRC, Mozambique, and Madagascar, but I believe Nicola might touch base on this, so can go over. One of the nice things that you can do with the dashboard is also calculate aggregated emission reductions for different regions, whatever combinations. So at the moment, you can derive those numbers to 2.4 billion tons of CO2 equivalents submitted to FRC and 190 million to the FCPF and arches. More details, you can go directly in the dashboard and look out and dig up for those. On NFI, this is also an area that we support largely. I put here the different countries where we have currently support on the existing forest inventories. So Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Gambia are either in the process or completed. And then countries like Ghana, Guinea, and Niger are developed methodologies, while Zambia is requesting support to the third implementation phase of its NFI. Again, more info on the forest monitoring website from FAO if you want. I have a lot of things to provide and convey in a limited time, so excuse me if some of this is going fast. But apart from those two, Azure, MRV, and FI, we have a specific project from Jeff on transparency called Seeded Forest. This is the phase 2, and among the things that have happened over the past year and a half is the really large FAO online facilitated course on institutionalizing forest data with over 3,000 participants, in the majority from Africa, so really worth mentioning here today. For those who didn't manage to attend, there will be a self-paced course that will be released in October, and I encourage you to look at that. Otherwise, we have lots of resources on building readiness, technical capacities, on examples from Benin institutionalizing the NFI work, sharing data through the Forest and Agriculture Micro Data Catalog for DRC, Gambia's upgrading from to digital tools for the next phase of its NFI. All this is available on the CBIT phase 2 pages with the hyperlinks that will be provided in the slides. I encourage you after the presentations to go and look it up. Another large program that we have in FAO is called Forest, funded by the UK. We currently are supporting 6 countries in Africa on different topics, from forest data upgrade, MRV, deforestation-free commodities, but also ecosystem restoration progress. And we do a little bit of those in different places. The program was launched in 2023. It's going until 2028. And at the moment, we are still focusing on those countries that may go up and may expand to other countries. But feel free to reach out to the M-Forest team if you're interested. I wanted to quickly touch base on an update from the last one we gave in last year, a year and a half ago, to say that we published the good practices in sample-based area estimation, and I've now developed a probability map subtraction process called PROMS that is basically making the most of creating maps easily, but also just using an automatic process to generate stratification if needed and to optimize sampling. We have ongoing work in Kenya, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone, and we finished already using this in different countries like Sudan and Zimbabwe. Use that for their reference level, but it was also the mechanism that enables to finish up the work we're doing on coffee and drivers of deforestation. So feel free to reach out. The whole process is available on the CEPAL documentation website. Speaking of coffee, we also finalized the work on drivers of deforestation, in degradation. 6 countries in Central Africa. The report is out. You can access the global methodology. Again, the website is there. We have really nice data in particular. This is being used by DRC for different carbon mechanism initiatives. So feel free to reach out. Very happy to have seen this project come to an efficient end. We're also closing another project in West Africa, funded by Sweden, and within which we collaborated with the University of Maryland and Oxford and Foreg from Ghana to calibrate JEDI data together with field and airborne LiDAR data. This came with creating L4 biomass maps that are generated for each of the countries. We also publish the process. You can reach out on the GitHub page if you are interested in those, but 15 countries from the ECOWAS region have this data now available and reproducible through the different notebooks. So also of interest. So I dealt with most of what we're doing on MRV and NFI so far. I'd just like to really quickly touch base on restoration work. That's also an important part of the activities we are carrying out in the team. So we have a close collaboration with different agencies around restoration initiatives that encompasses monitoring supports, organization workshops, supports the reporting of the African countries that have been selected for the UN World Restoration Flagship. And those are some examples of the country activities that have happened over the past year. So yeah, again, check out what is happening on the firm online, training material, and we have upcoming webinars and dialogues for the rest of the year. I would like to give 3 country examples really quick to kind of wrap up the work that we're doing. I want to mention the heavy work we're doing in Kenya, because we have the 3 programs, Aim for Forest, Aim for Nature, and Aim for Commodities, co-funded between the UK and Germany, JZ, to support different areas of monitoring the forest for different purposes. So it's a nice example of a country where we do implement all the different aspects of the teamwork. In particular, there was a joint workshop in May where we progressed towards the Clean Montreal Target 2 reporting. Also started the geolocation discussion around the geolocation campaign led by the Agriculture and Forest Administration of Kenya together with GRC, JZ, and EFI. And also work towards the finalization of the dated FRAL. So interesting multi-dimensional workshops, lots of activities in Kenya, and I thought worth mentioning and taking as an example. Specifically on commodities, we have very interesting work that's happened around digital public infrastructure and tools. I'd like to mention just the work that's happening on coffee data, data collection, with an example from not FAO, but the International Trade Center of the World Trade Organization, using the FAO open forest tools to carry out data collection campaigns. And they've published a nice web story around how digital public tools enable smallholders to keep access to premium markets under regulatory mechanism like the UDR. Again, I encourage you to have a look at that, and I put the link in the slide. I wanted to mention the work we're doing with the EFI and GRC in Cameroon, finishing on cocoa mapping at national level. Lots of activities also happened, and nice collaboration with Google around Alpha Earth and the embeddings. You can check out on the FAO page dedicated to Cameroon to look it up. And last but not least, work that's been done together with CIOS, AGEOS, and USFS last year around deforestation alert and mangrove mapping. There was a workshop in Libreville where all those topics were addressed, and with also interesting field dedicated work to it. So interesting collaboration that happened. on previous era of institutions, but definitely good work to piggyback on. I think that's a very generic and quick overview of the work we're doing in different countries, but it summarizes relatively well the spread of things. As you can imagine, this is not just me, Remy, talking about those things, but there's like lots of colleagues that would like to acknowledge on the work and also for the contributions to the slides. Again, this is a quick pitch for you to go and look into the hyperlinks where you can find more details. I hope that was clear enough and I kept more or less the time. Tom, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Remy. You did a brilliant job of keeping to time. Thank you, and providing a presentation on the enormous amount of work that FAO is doing in the region across an enormous amount of countries and topics as well. So congratulations to you and the team. If anybody has questions for Remy, please pop them into the Q&A box. If you can't find the Q&A box, you might have to click on more, and then you'll be able to add Q&A to the bottom of your Zoom bar there. But thank you very much, Remy. I'll now pass over to Naikoa from the World Bank to provide his update. Over to you, Naikoa.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, good. So hello, everybody. My name is Naikoa Aguilara Muchastegui. I'm a senior climate change specialist at the World Bank, particularly working with the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, as well as the Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes, or the Biocarbon Fund, which are two funds that are supporting results-based payment for emissions reductions in programs at jurisdictional scales in several countries in Africa. I imagine that we have participants that come from these countries. Just a word of caution. We are not an agency that delivers the support in the same way as FAO does, but we collaborate with agencies like FAO to generate the capacities and the support to generate the potential for access to carbon markets. In that, so you're gonna see a lot of administrative information here regarding on how the programs that we have been working with have been going on and so forth, but also specific support that we have been giving and working on with the countries, with supporting agencies such as ISA and others, and FAO in the region. Okay, so the first fund about which I would like to give you an update is the Biocarbon Fund with the Initiative for Sustainable Forest Landscapes. For those of you who are not familiar with this fund, I need to clarify that it's a bit different from the REDD+ traditional way of working, because it moves from REDD+ activities, which are deforestation, degradation, sustainable forest management, conservation stocks, and afforestation, into land use, land cover categories, because it's trying to look at jurisdiction as a complete system that goes beyond forest and includes other land uses. So it targets the whole AFOLU or land use sector. So it includes agriculture and livestock. Under this fund, we have 3 programs in Africa: Ethiopia, Zambia, and Ghana. So I'm happy to report that Ethiopia has submitted already its first monitoring report for the Oromia jurisdiction program covering the period 22-23, which is currently under validation and verification. What that means is that it's not only the performance that is assessed at this stage with the first monitoring report, but it's also the baseline. So you validate the baseline and you verify the results reported in the first monitoring report. And they're going very fast there because they have not even finished the process of validation verification of the first monitoring report, and they have already submitted their second monitoring report for what is called phase 1. Ethiopia has 2 phases in its program. the difference between the phase 1 and the phase 2 is that phase 2 incorporates additional categories in the scope of activities that are covered under the program, and then adds up forest, remaining forest, and livestock. This work has been done with the support of FAO, notably in the areas of activity data for land cover change. So this is, once again, one of the areas where FAO has also been involved and has been helping with the technical aspects in the production of those data sets. Similarly, in Zambia and Ghana. In the case of Zambia, they have presented their first monitoring report for the Eastern Province, covering 2024. And there's ongoing work. Once the process starts and the assessment happens, the gaps that are identified need to be covered. And then that's where we, as a technical team in the World Bank, come into giving the direct support or via partners to cover those gaps. And then, so in this case, there's field work supporting to improve data, including new plot measurements for forest biomass maps to improve the emissions factors data. And there's also a request by the country to develop a new jurisdictional program in Muchinga province. So this is a case in which the bank operations or classic lending operations of the bank get synergies with these ongoing emissions reductions programs to try to target and benefit from the emissions reductions that implementation of improved practices can deliver. Finally, Ghana is presenting its third monitoring report. This is under FCPF. Sorry, this should have been in the other slide. And they're going to be covering 22-23. So just a correction. So Ethiopia and Zambia are under ISFL. Ghana is part of FCPF. I will cover it in the next slide. Now, regarding FCPF, I go directly to outcomes and impact. This table summarizes the performance of the emissions reductions program agreements that the bank has with countries in Africa, including Cote d'Ivoire, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, Madagascar, Mozambique, and Republic of Congo. You see the total reported emissions reductions that these programs have submitted so far with their normally only first monitoring reports. In some particular cases, like the case of Ivory Coast, they are already in their last monitoring report. And the volumes that the bank has paid directly, and then there's also volumes that the countries have delivered that go beyond the commitment contract volume that's here on the last column, which gives countries opportunities to sell those emissions reductions outside the bank with reaching better prices. And as you can see here, there are multiple countries that have been able to benefit from that. And that's where we also engage in helping the country finding the buyers and getting better prices. So this table gives you, in a nutshell, a general overview of where all the FCPF programs are. Challenges in the regional overview. When you work with these programs, you have to go through the actual process of presenting the data, having them reported under the specific standards, in this case, FCPF or ISFL, and then go through validation verification. And this is where, if those capabilities are not sustained in the long term, or there's changes because there's changes in government, or lack of institutionalization of the team members or of the entities with whom we are working with, that generates a series of problems that basically come into evidence. So one of the regional challenges that we have had thus far as an overview in the region is the lack of institutionalization of MRV teams. So in many cases, these are ad hoc teams, or there's no long-term plans for the sustainability of the teams. And then we see these constant loss of trained people to other agencies and entities. So there's no sustainability strategies. So we struggle with this. This has been an ongoing project that's taken over a decade, and we see that moving forward. There's still a high dependency on technical support from external partners, in many cases, consultants, agencies like FAO, ISA, contractors, etc., for the elaboration of activity data and emissions factors. In many cases, as you know, there's incomplete or non-existing national forest inventory data, so we have had to be resourceful and make use of alternative options. In some cases, use of biomass maps, not necessarily in the best way. And then, of course, there's a high reliance of the need of support for estimation of uncertainties in the numbers. So it's an ongoing process of helping the countries acquire and sustain those capacities. From an administrative perspective, we also have to deal with issues such as double claiming and double counting that can happen with projects, voluntary carbon projects that are nested or are occurring inside the jurisdictions within which we work, which traditionally, people think that this is something that you solve from an MRV perspective, from a technical perspective, but it's mostly, most of the time, it's related with political and legal aspects within the countries that have to do with also who's the holder of the emission reduction or the title transfer and who's eligible for that. And that's related also with benefit sharing. Just a parenthesis here, because what we do from the technical side informs all these elements, but at the end of the day, when it's the agreements regarding the emissions reductions and the money that will come towards the countries after performance that defines how those numbers are to be used. Some country examples that I would like to highlight. The first one is the Republic of Congo. I think this is a very interesting country because it's the only one that we have in all of our portfolio that incorporates sustainable forest management as an activity. And we use an intensity method for assessing those emissions from logging. So basically what you do is based on data from the field in terms of volumes extracted as well as the amount of impact to the forest cover that these activities at the level that they are performing the baseline generate per cubic meter of wood logged. And then you compare that to what you do in your reporting period through the implementation of practices such as those highlighting the reduced impact logging methodologies. And then that's how you assess the performance for sustainable forest management. What that entails is a challenge to figure out which are the areas that are going to be looked and accounted for under this methodology, as opposed to the rest of the country for which the data on deforestation and forest degradation is produced with remote sensing data with the support, for example, of the University of Maryland. So we have to develop an approach that uses buffers from logging roads to define that stratum, les assiettes de coupe, as we call them. And then basically this is what allows us to avoid having issues with double accounting from the remote sensing data and the logging data at the same time in some areas. So this is an interesting approach that we had to develop for this country. There's also ongoing work regarding the biomass estimates with the support of one of the ESA GDA programs, which instead of trying to produce the maps from scratch, what was done was to recalibrate a global biomass map, which is the CCI biomass map using a national plot data. They just presented their first monitoring report. It's undergoing validation verification. It's almost done. And the next steps are to produce the activity data for the second monitoring and third monitoring reports. And that requires, of course, going into the field and acquire the data inside the concessions. Regarding the Democratic Republic of Congo, with the support of University of Maryland, in the same way as for Republic of Congo, they have submitted their first monitoring report, which has been verified. So the DRC received last February their first payment. They produced XSCRs that are now looking for the best buyer to get the highest price. And the second monitoring report was submitted as well. It's undergoing a completeness check to then be sent to the validation verification bodies. The third monitoring report is currently under elaboration, and I would like to highlight that it's the first time that the team, the DF, has moved forward into producing their activity data on their own. So this is a happy evolution, and we're looking forward to see the results of that work by themselves. We will be using the University of Maryland to compare the data that they are producing as a means to guarantee that the information that is finally incorporated in the monitoring report is not going to have any issues regarding during validation verification. And things that we are discussing right now is synergies with the National Forest Reference Level. And once again, we discussed with FAO and the support that they're giving to the country regarding this. I would like to highlight Ivory Coast and Mozambique because of their institutionalization of their national MRV systems. I think that the regional scale, I would look into these countries to understand how they have been perhaps being able to become completely independent in their monitoring towards the FCPF and their institutionalization of their MRV teams. I think that this is one of the reasons why they have become mostly independent. Although I support directly these two countries, I have hardly to participate in the exchanges they have with the validation verification bodies when they are presenting their monitoring reports, which is really nice. And they both have presented their final monitoring reports and are now looking into moving forward into applying the methods and the capacities they have for more national and more diverse scopes. Is for all the countries, actually, we're assessing the transition of all the programs that we have in the region to other standards. As a reminder, the FCPF ends in December 2028. So we're looking into what's going to happen with all these jurisdictional programs that entails adapting the MRV methods towards the requirements of other standards such as Art3s, or if they want to go and link things more with what is being required and discussed now for Article 6.2 and 6.4 and the ITMOS and these type of things. We're also discussing that. Madagascar, they're presenting the second monitoring report. One of the things that happens when you are working supporting countries, but also supporting the management of a standard such as the FCPF and the ISFL, is that sometimes you discover that you have made mistakes in initial monitoring reports, and then you have to do corrective actions. This is what happened with the second monitoring report of Madagascar. During the verification, the country found out that by themselves that they had made some mistakes in the emissions factors for the baseline, for the reporting performance of the first monitoring report, and that was of course impacting the second monitoring report. And then they went ahead and reported that directed to the standard managers in a proactive manner and updated all the data sets, and the corrective actions were put into play. Apologies for the bunch of typos. I will share my slides without typos after the end of the presentation. So this is just so you have an idea that of the iterative process regarding presenting monitoring reports, and then how in some instances human error can be incorporated and how it needs to be dealt with both by the countries but also by the standard managers. Outside of FCPF and ISFL, I'm happy to inform that with the support of a new fund, which is Scaling Climate Action by Lowering Emissions, we're moving into West Africa, so the West African region. So once again, synergies with what Remy just presented regarding FAO work in the region are being put into place. the idea is to help countries that had not benefited from readiness funds under FCPF or ISFF to be able to catch up and have access to results-based payments. So there's a focus on Guinea, Benin, Liberia, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic. Ivory Coast is already there, but the idea is to support these first countries. We already did an initial assessment for Guinea, and the idea is to replicate and expand that for the entire region. We're working with a consortium to help us with that, and of course, with what's going on in the country directly and with support of different agencies. The approach is to produce not something that targets a specific standard, but something that produces and prepares the country to produce data with a broader scope. So that's why I say it's a standard agnostic data approach, and then build the capacities for the countries to package the data sets and present those towards any standard that the country decides to target. We think that it's a better approach than just going to all into specific standard, and then if you want to have access to other standards, then you will have to, in many cases, have to redo everything or do something in parallel. Because of that, we are trying to work on a land cover approach, which is because it's easier to package land cover transitions into REDD+ activities than all the way around. Give you an example: deforestation can mean anything under land cover transitions. You need to know what's the end use of the land for a greenhouse gas inventory. It's not the same forest to green to pasture land than forest to yearly crops or pasture to perennial or agroforestry system. So that makes it's more challenging to produce these data sets. And then, of course, we're coordinating with FAO in the region. The next steps we have there is the gap assessment to really have a benchmark on the work that we need to do in each one of the countries, and strategic planning that is going to have both a regional scope, but also a specific scope for each one of the countries. Final thoughts. On the way ahead is going to be a lot about the transition from FCPF and ISFL to other standards. Move from REDD+ activities to land use land cover for greenhouse gas inventories, because it's, as I said, easier to repackage and better linkages with NDCs and Article 6 and ITMOs. Again, it's good to try to target standard agnostic approaches to MRV to generate multi-purpose data sets. And then finally, I want to highlight the engagement that FAO and the World Bank are having with this emergent fund, which is the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, that is going to be about conservation of forest cover. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend the third version of their concept note just came out. I forgot to include that here. I highly recommend you looking into that, and we are going to be supporting the secretariat of that fund in developing the methodological requirements for that. And with that, I thank you. Back to you, Tom. Sorry if I took too long, which I'm sure I did. Sorry.
No. Wonderful. Thank you, Nokoa. It's a really fascinating update from, the World Bank as a major fund manager in our sector, who's been around since the early days of REDD+ with the FCPF and what have you. I'll ask you to stop sharing your screen if that's okay, Nokoa.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the button.
Through to the a very clear demonstration of the progress that's been made by countries in terms of emissions reductions reported and results-based payments being paid out, and then looking towards the future there at the end as well. So thank you very much. There's already one question for you in the chat or in the Q&A box, Nokoa, about institutionalization, which you may have answered with the nice examples from Mozambique and the Ivory Coast, but I refer you to that. And speaking of institutionalization, I'll now hand over to Peter Moore from the GFOI office's country-led planning team or CLP team, and encourage others to do like Dennis.
Should I answer now or just type the answer?
If you type the answer, then we might come back to it for a conversation at the end, Nokoa. Thanks.
All right.
But others, please follow Dennis's lead and start to ask some questions. Thank you. Over to you, Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, Tom. And of course, we'd love questions. That's the way we sort of spread the discussion and make things richer and deeper. My name's Peter Moore. As Tom mentioned, I'm presenting today on behalf of the country-led planning team, which includes, as you can see there on our list, and they're all present with us today, Ellie Peneva-Reid, who basically runs the team or tries to keep the cats herded together, Gabriela Nunes, Marco Mazzera, and Maria Fernanda. And we work across 10 countries, which you'll see in a minute. I'd like to thank Remy and Naikoa, because Remy showed us that wide range of quite sophisticated and emerging and new technologies and the use of old data and traditional things that we know about, like national forest inventories, and the fact that that's all emerging and evolving and addressing new standards. And then Naikoa mentioned a couple of things that are really relevant to country-led planning. He noted that one of the aspects they've run into, and he mentioned it over the last decade, was the sort of capacity, continuity, and the consistency. In a country, he mentioned that teams change and governments sometimes change and agencies merge and so on and so forth, or come apart, and that the issues often around some of the reporting are not only technical, perhaps not even mainly technical. They do venture into being political and legal. And then, very encouragingly, he noted for us three examples. One was the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is currently preparing its own activity data for that third monitoring, which is fantastic to see. And then, of course, Cote d'Ivoire and Mozambique, which are operating themselves independently. They have an institutionalization of their national forest monitoring system. Why am I enthusiastic about all that? Let me show you. What the CLP initiative is about is working with countries in a process to institutionalize and embed their national forest monitoring systems. So you'll see why and I'm sure I'm speaking for the others, but we're very interested to see that Ivory Coast, Mozambique and DRC are all making strides in that direction. Here you can see the 10 countries that we're working with, the 3 that started in 2023, Fiji, Guatemala and Kenya, and we'll talk about Kenya a bit in a minute. 2024, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Naikoa was mentioning them briefly, Peru and Vietnam, and then in 2025, Belize, Cambodia, Nigeria and Zambia. So quite a bit of representation for Africa. What we're seeking to do is to help the countries to embed and institutionalize those national forest monitoring systems. Naikoa mentioned standard agnostic approaches where the data is collected and it can be tuned and directed to what a country wants to do, how one country wants to do things, including domestic things. And what do we do in doing that? Well, firstly, the activity is country-led. We support with things like multi-stakeholder discussions, reviving or establishing national consultations and coordination mechanisms, which we're doing in a couple of countries, and then commencing technical and functional gap assessments, the sort of things that Naikoa mentioned about that sometimes aren't looked at as consistently or as clearly as they can be, and reviewing things like country planning processes. Now, I don't mean forest planning processes, although that's part of it. I mean administrative, governance, financial, state planning processes, and strengthening or establishing intersectoral coordination mechanisms. How do we do that? We have a series of activities that we undertake. First, of course, was the process of identifying those 10 countries, and that came through collaboration with the GFOI partners and leads and with other donors and activities with the UK. The UK, as with Aim for Forests, as Remy mentioned, is a key funding body for us in the country-led planning under GFOI. So the country is identified, and you can see there that the three countries in the region, Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, have all been worked with. We've had strategy meetings about what the country is seeking to do, and identified and worked with the countries about what they would like. We prepare a country brief, a study of the context of the country, and a plan of how to engage with the countries, and then conduct an exploration mission. Country-led implementation involves those things I talked about before: multi-stakeholder consultations, perhaps review and analysis of the things, one of the things that Naikoa mentioned, the legal and legislative framework, and then facilitation of functional gap assessments. What are the functions that are not in place that countries like Ivory Coast and Mozambique have obviously managed to put in place and to get their national forest monitoring system embedded in their national processes, agencies, and across government. We prepare and work with global and regional forums called Connect and Reflect. We had one of those physically in Rome last November, and countries, including in this case Kenya, attended that. And then there'll be a virtual forum in September, later this month, middle of this month, and then as part of the GFOI plenary, which will be held later in the year, we'll also be having the CLP activities and a day and a workshop as part of that. And then there's ongoing support for the countries that are making progress in these ways. Just as with Remy and Naikoa, the three main examples for us from Africa. An overview for Kenya: you can see the parts of government that we're currently engaging with. I should point out, Remy mentioned that the Aim for Forests, Aim for Nature, and Aim for Commodities groups are all working together in Kenya. The CLP also works with them, and in fact the way it's emerging is that all four of the initiatives are interacting regularly. We were all part of the same workshop in May in Nairobi, and we're looking to do that again and synergize with each other and work with a group of stakeholders that's bigger than any one, but overlaps quite significantly, and that's proving to be very constructive and useful and efficient. The activities we've undertaken in Kenya: we prepared a country brief in the first quarter of this year. We had that joint RED Plus and Restoration Technical Working Group meeting. The RED Plus Technical Working Group is one of those groups that has been in place for some time, and we're part of the process with the government of Kenya in activating that again. And we have, as I just mentioned, a joint work plan with Aim for Forests, Aim for Nature, and Aim for Commodities for 2025, and that process will continue into 2026. For the rest of this year, I mentioned the second virtual forum, Connect and Reflect, and the dates there, the 18th of September 2025, so it's coming up on us quite quickly. And then the mini CLP Connect and Reflect forum on the 20th of October, which is during the day before the GFOI plenary starts in Indonesia. We will be, at the request of the government and in collaboration with the agencies, looking at stakeholder mapping and stock taking of activities of all the key players. And this is something I should emphasise that was requested by the participants, by the stakeholders in Kenya. They recognise there's lots of things happening and lots of things that have happened in the past, and they don't feel comfortable with being fully across it. And so we're going to help them to work through that process. And one of the ways of doing that is through a multi-stakeholder engagement to look at what a successful embedded national forest monitoring system for Kenya will look like. And of course, thanks to Naikoa, we've now identified that we have at least 2 and probably 2 and a bit examples of countries in Africa that have made significant progress on that. And later on in quarter 4, in Kenya, we'll be undertaking a functional gap assessment. And that's to look at what are those legal, political, institutional arrangements, what are the governance arrangements that are perhaps not as strong as they should be, that are missing, or they're perhaps overlapping and complicating things to some extent. We're also working in Nigeria. This is Marco Mazera and some other members of the Aim for Forest team visited there in July of this year. And off the back of a technical process, the NFMS assessment validation workshop, which does include an institutional component, institutional arrangements component. There was a workshop on that in collaboration with FAO colleagues, and the CLP then had a roundtable discussion in Abuja with other stakeholders as part of that same mission, and we've prepared a draft country brief as a team. Marco's put that together. It's under review. Next steps for Nigeria, as with Kenya, is the second virtual forum and participation in the Connect and Reflect forum and the GFOI plenary. There'll be a strategic meeting with the GFOI leads to see what other actors, leads and partners of GFOI have been doing, what information they know, what knowledge they have about Nigeria. This is to improve the understanding that we have as a team, but also to make sure that we synergise with activities that already exist in Nigeria. We'll conduct an exploration mission in the fourth quarter, so October, November, December, sometime in there. Conduct stakeholder mapping, and once again, a CLP functional gap assessment. I should point out these things aren't discrete activities. They tend to overlap a little bit and one feeds into the other, and they don't have to be in a particular order. They can be done at the behest or with the interest of the country as it's expressed as we interact with them. Zambia, which Ellie Paneva-Reid is on point for, and you'll see there's quite a long list of agencies in the government that have been involved in Zambia, and this is particularly off the back of a lot of the work that FAO and other partners are already doing on forests and monitoring and measurement in the country. There was a strategy meeting and an engagement plan prepared in May of this year. There was a joint exploration mission also in May, and there's been ongoing informal communication with government officials, some of whom were in Rome at the same time as the Connect and Reflect Forum in November, and we arranged to meet with them and have discussion with them. We will prepare a country brief for Zambia, again, just to emphasise that's about helping us to understand the broader context of the country. What are its aspirations in respect to forests? What are the domestic requirements in terms of what the activities are needed to provide the forest monitoring information and data that helps the country make domestic decisions? Once again, the virtual forum and attendance in Indonesia, and a multi-stakeholder workshop is being planned for the fourth quarter, assisted by FAO in Zambia. And there'll be a collaborative implementation of the CLP functional gap assessment, tentatively in the second quarter of next year, after the multi-stakeholder workshop and some further discussion. All three of these countries are coming to the second, or attending the second virtual forum, and coming to Indonesia. And of course, those also provide opportunities to increase the group of stakeholders we interact with, but also to sit down and have those discussions one-on-one and together that can help to deepen and strengthen the sorts of efforts that the country would like support in, and that the country would like to lead in developing and embedding its national forest monitoring system across government. As Nakoa mentioned, there are a number of challenges and some directions. A sustainable national forest monitoring system requires country to address multiple complex issues in addition to the technical tasks. Nakoa, thank you again, Nakoa mentioned a number of those, and they include things like establishing the governance arrangements, defining clear roles and responsibilities, securing sustainable finance, and very importantly, and this comes up in every country, in every agency, strategies to ensure retention of the uniquely qualified staff required to operate a national forest monitoring system. We have examples from our interaction with countries of significant amounts of churn of staff coming and going from agencies that are critical in these roles. Countries have also identified needs for national data sharing arrangements within an integrated national system. This speaks a little bit to the agnostic standards that Nicole was talking about. Collect the data in a systematic way according to a standard, integrate it in a standard way, handle it in a standard way to make it readily available and usable across government and across agencies for those domestic and international policy applications, settings, uses and reporting. Improving stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement is one of those things that never ever finishes and always we can do more of. And also, in particular, in a couple of the countries, including the Indigenous communities in the efforts related to stakeholder engagement. On our roadmap, and I've mentioned these because the countries in this case are coming together a little bit on the things that they're asking to be done with them as they lead their country-led planning processes, is the second virtual forum and then the meeting in Indonesia, multi-stakeholder workshops in each country, and collaborative implementation of that country-led planning functional gap assessment, emphasising again that this is looking at things like government institutional arrangements, collaboration between agencies, reporting systems for government and across government, often extending well outside traditional or the forest and land management agencies. Groups like the ministries and departments of statistics and others that are key actors in the area of data and its handling and manipulation and management. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to Tom. You can see our email addresses there, and we're happy to take any questions from the team. Thanks, Tom.
Wonderful, Peter. Thank you so much for the update on country-led planning activities in Africa. This issue of institutionalization of these systems is clearly a hot topic for the community, being touched on by, I guess, by all of the three presentations today. So thank you very much. There's a question for you in the Q&A box as well, Peter. I'll give you a chance to review that one. Anyone else who has a question, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A box, or we can maybe deal with a couple in the chat as well. We won't be able to take spoken questions from the audience. Sorry, there's just simply too many people, but please type them out. Nicole, I wanted to come to you first. You gave this nice example of these independent monitoring teams and fully institutionalized systems in the Ivory Coast and Mozambique. What do you think was key to their success? Like, why was it different in these countries, and why have they been successful in institutionalizing their systems where, in some other cases, we're still trying? Any insights there?
Yes, of course, I cannot have the complete answer, right? Because there's many variables that can explain that. But as I mentioned in the Q&A chat box, I think that one key aspect is that in these countries, rather than create new parachute institutions, because readiness funds arrived and then there were institutions that were created specifically for red plus purposes, but rather than doing that, they just added the scope of work to the scope of activities of already existing institutions that had already established procedures, legal frameworks, mandates, etc., and then they continued with those, which guaranteed the long-term sustainability of the institution per se, and also the functions. But there is also the assignment of funding, no? Rather than seeing it as a project-by-project basis. In the places where we have failed for long-term sustainability, it has been because the money arrived, the teams were created on a project-specific basis, but there has not been this process of like, hey, now we need to continue doing this for the long term. We need the legal framework, the political structures, defining the mandates of the different agencies that need to work and collaborate, because these are constructs that in many cases require different ministries to talk to each other and things like that. And then on top of that, have a long-term cash flow approach to the sustainability of the function as well as the teams. In some cases, this is because of lack of capacity, but unfortunately, I have to say that in some cases, it's also by design. Basically, you do it by design because that incentivizes a continuous flow of capacity building support that comes from abroad to maintain this business model, no? And I think that, and then it's only when the likelihood of that funding coming in that in some instances that catalyzes this process of appropriation by some countries. In other cases, it just everything collapses. And then there's the element of but there's also the fact that we have been, from the donor side, we have not been very strategic. And I think that Peter's presentation on CLP is super important. We have not been strategic in how we support countries. We target the technical teams that are currently involved in the tasks, but without really targeting building a critical mass of practitioners inside of the country. So when someone highly skilled leaves, then there's always someone that can come behind and take up on the work. And I think that that's a problem that comes from both sides, from the donor side, but also from the country side, who are not being put in the position of putting on the table what is it that the country has to offer to guarantee the long-term sustainability of the capabilities that donors are coming to help acquire and sustain. So that conversation has not been really held. But in countries like Mozambique and Ivory Coast, it was also not a requirement because there was the vision of the teams and the institutions that they were building capacities and acquiring in those for things that would go beyond carbon and would have benefits for everything related to national forests and natural richness management, natural resources management, and so forth. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Makoa. It's a really good example. I think the particular issue is that our sector is largely made up of technical people who are used to, processing data and looking at data and making technical decisions. And some of these questions around institutional arrangements and legal issues and administrative arrangements require a bit of a different skill set, which is what the CLP program is trying to provide. But it's a difficult conversation for some of us who have been working in the processing of data and what have you for the best part of 2 decades now. But thank you for that. I think there's a useful lesson perhaps to be learned for other countries in the region from the Ivory Coast and Mozambique. And we might look to see how GFOI can help to promote some of those lessons learned for the rest of the community. While Peter is still considering his answer, I'll come to you for a spoken answer in a second, Peter. There's a second question for you, Nako, about where we can find out a bit more information on the collaboration with the University of Maryland. There's a link you can share, or just want to give a quick overview of how the bank has been working with the University of Maryland.
Yeah. So the work with the University of Maryland goes back over a decade. It has been mostly in Republic of Congo and Democratic Republic of Congo because Matt Hansen, who's the lead of the team that we work with, has been engaged with the Congo since his days in the Peace Corps. So basically, he has a family relations there. So it builds on the backload that of the interests of the leader of the team that we're working with, but also on the necessities that we have had as the program managers for DRC and ROC, and the situation in terms of capacities that have been presenting themselves in both countries, which have made it so that for the sake of production of activity data, we have had to collaborate with him, also capitalizing on ongoing support that USAID was giving to both countries. That unfortunately stopped recently. And then what that entails is that we had also to assume some responsibilities that were not there regarding the sustainability of the UMD team itself. So what I want to try to say like that is that collaboration is not a fraternal one, but yes, it's a fraternal one, but it's also a dependency one, right? In which they are helping us support the countries in the delivery of the data that they need for their monitoring reports. That being said, UMD is engaged in a lot of capacity building and supporting endeavors. Remy mentioned, for example, the use of the JEDI data for biomass mapping with Laura Ducanson. She comes from the University of Maryland, from the Ralph Dubaya lab, who is the scientist, the leader scientist for the JEDI mission, and so forth. So I think it's a matter of getting in touch with them and then exploring with them the possibilities for collaboration, considering the fact that there might be necessity to look together for the funding, no, for that collaboration to be able to materialize itself, because basically that's how things work. I don't know, Remy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because I think that question also touches what you have been doing with UMD.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair point, and it's a fair point that UMD is actually larger than just GLAD. There's many different areas, and yes, we had a very interesting collaboration with the team from Laura Duncanson on JEDI, also collaborating with GLAD. It's not siloed spaces in the university, but they're very strong on those monitoring and remote sensing in general. So yeah, definitely good partners. Just wanted to mention that if there is interest to use the data sets that we made available through the collaboration with UMD and Oxford and FORIC for West Africa, the data is already available and that was pre-processed and whether it will run. So that's available. You can reach out to us. We're going to make it all available in one-stop shop on the FAO page regarding the project. But also we have published the notebooks that enable to recreate that for other countries. So if there are places not within West Africa that would want to develop those L4 models for better biomass data, for instance, that's something we would be very interested in hearing. We need field data that can come from NFI, for instance, but also airborne LiDAR, so that's less common. But if there's any of those that you know of and you would like to replicate the work that we've done on calibrating the JEDI instruments, we would certainly welcome that for further collaboration. Yeah.
Thanks, Remy. I want to highlight what Remy mentioned, no? Synergies between remote sensing data and national forest inventories. We usually, when we talk about these matters, the spatial part takes over, but I think that we need to underline the fact that plot data and data on the ground is the basis for it all. So yeah, and I think that FAO does a great work supporting countries with that. And then we are now getting to an era in which the people who are in space and the people who are on the ground are actually coming to terms with the fact that they need to talk and hold hands together. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Remy and Nokoa. If anybody's interested in more information on that work, please put your email address in the chat and we can arrange for someone to follow up with you. Thank you. Peter, I'll throw to you now on the question from Dennis somewhere in the chat about obviously countries have varying levels of forest cover and different development perspectives and objectives. How do we account for that? What are some lessons learned? And then also what's the role of local research organisations and universities in the CLP process in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis. Thanks for the question. It's a very good one because as was mentioned earlier and Tom picked up on and Nokoa mentioned that there's, for Cote d'Ivoire and Mozambique, they have already, they're doing things themselves, and that suggests they have created capacity and consistency across government, that they're interacting within government, that they've got standards and they've sorted things out to the extent they need to and are working well and dealing with a constantly changing environment. So that is obviously a very interesting lesson to know more about, as Tom mentioned, and it's certainly something that we'll be focusing on and working on further. The lessons that are emerging are really, if you think about the way the forest thing evolved and markets and all those sorts of things. Everybody sort of rushed towards it in a way, Dennis, not actually thinking, hang on a minute, what's our forest context? What are our forest agency contexts? What's our capacity? What's our capability? What are our competencies in order to work through those things? And so we have perhaps not so much anymore, but we had a bunch of countries that sort of headed the same direction, even though their context was quite different. And you mentioned, the heavily forested countries. In the Congo Basin, for instance, and then by contrast, some of the countries that we're working with that are further south or to the west or the east that have a much different context. So part of it is helping the country to understand what sort of questions, what it needs to understand about its own context and what it can do. And so I've mentioned in the written response, to have a clear understanding of what those opportunities and options are, and that rests on a good understanding of what your forest data is. And Naikoa and Remy were just talking about the increasing collaboration and interaction between the field data, which is the base. I am a forester, and so I'm very interested and keen on stuff in the field. But of course, remote sensing is a very strong, useful, and wonderful reality that we have. So looking at those two things, but to do that is where the sort of CLP type things, these functional capacities, become important. How can a country have that conversation about its forests if its agencies are heavily siloed, or if its laws don't contribute towards that, or if its administrative and other processes don't enable those things to be formulated? You don't have a way of bringing a group together to talk about those things, or to fund a working group at national or subnational level on a topic. So that's where the CLP comes into play, helping those governments and their agencies, stakeholders and actors. The research side of things is incredibly important. Remy and Naikoa were just talking about the University of Maryland, and of course one of the great strengths of the University of Maryland is that it was early in this area. It's been able to be consistent over an extended period of time in that area and increase its expertise, and of course it's completely independent. It has to source funding and so on, and it works for certain places and regions, but it's an independent body, and that's what the research and the research stations and universities, that's what they're really for, is to help with that. Universities, of course, have the extremely critical and fundamental requirement to keep providing people with the skills, the understanding and the competencies and capabilities that can feed into these agencies and governments at all levels, field to the policy level, to do that. And I think universities have probably one of the really important strategic roles, which is that education of the next generations and generations. If I look at my own forestry training compared to what the sort of forestry training one would need now, the universities have had to change enormously across the time of my career. So all very important, but the CLP focus is on helping a country to lead a process of bringing all of those groups together so that they can consider exactly the question you ask: what are the lessons from elsewhere, and what are our lessons, and what can we do with them? Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. It really is an interesting challenge, and we're delighted that we have the CLP program now to help countries start to, tackle some of these issues, so that all of the enormous amount of technical work we've been doing in building these systems over the best part of the last 2 decades can be sustained and can be utilised by countries to pursue their national objectives. And special shout out to the government of the UK for funding the CLP program through the GFOI office. So thank you to colleagues there. I want to change tack a little bit now. Remy, there was a question for you early on, which I think is, I know you typed a nice response to, but just would welcome you talking to this again, about, I guess, the role of the FAO tools, and particularly as the example of the coffee geolocation and cocoa mapping initiatives in Cameroon, and how these relate to the EUDR regulation, and what the role, I guess, is of FAO within this, because it's a bit of a complicated landscape for people who don't maybe work in it every day. So maybe just talk through your answer there, and the work that FAO is doing to help countries understand some of these regulations by providing tools and platforms.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, the specific work we're doing in Cameroon falls under the banner of the Sustainable Cocoa Program, which is funded by the EU with and implemented by GIZ, EFI, FAO, and JRC. So that's Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Cameroon are all benefiting from that support through dialogues, through build-up of maps, like the Land Cover 2020 map that Côte d'Ivoire produced was done with JRC and EFI and support of FAO through the quality assessment that was publicly released, and it's one of the early examples of countries publicly releasing 2020 Land Cover data to support the regulation in particular. In Cameroon, FAO is leading the work on cocoa mapping, and among the deliverables will be a probability map of cocoa at pixel level. Yes, it's intended that those layers are useful for compliance under the EU regulation. Not proving anything, but really supporting zero deforestation compliance claims. In particular, this can be very useful through processes like the WISP platform that we've developed under Open Forest to implement a convergence of evidence approach, where we can actually combine different land cover layers to tell a story on land use at plot level. So interesting approach we've developed there. I'm happy to put up the links. In general, the Sustainable Cocoa Program will be finishing next year, so those deliverables are coming. There still are some, and I want to say that because it's one of the key tricky points of the regulation on agroforestry, and fully shady cocoa-like systems that we can find in Cameroon are still difficult to manage through just remote sensing. And this is yet again where remote sensing people and ground people need to work together, because there is, whatever high resolution, whatever techniques you may use to automatically detect those, there are places and systems like very completely closed canopy agroforestry system where shady cocoa, shady coffee cannot be seen yet with just remote sensing, and we need data from the ground. So the Cocoa project addresses that, because there's lots of work happening on the ground together with the CICC and other national institutions. I'll put up a bit of links in the chat to support what I've just been saying.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Remy. And one final question from me to you is that, it's clear that after many years of working in the sector, we're starting to see results. We're seeing, performance-based payments being dispersed. We're seeing results being reported to the UNFCCC, many different carbon standards popping up. And this is the case in Africa. We saw from NICOA's slide the total volume of emissions reductions being reduced. It seems that the MRV dashboard that you presented is a great resource for countries to go and see that progress that collectively our community is helping to achieve. Or the countries are obviously leading it, but with support of the international community. So yeah, I guess encourage people to go and take a look at that dashboard, and if you need a little injection of motivation and goodwill to see the progress that we're making, please do so. And I think that's updated for every submission that's made to the UNFCCC, or it's definitely regularly updated, right, Remy? So it's a very close account of all of the results being reported.
Correct. And you don't have to wait for every year for us to update the publication. It's a great publication that our colleague Marcus Sanka was leading for a while. But we all together decided that it would be better to have live, updated source of information where you can actually interact with it and make your own assessment. Yes, correct.
Excellent. Thanks, Remy. Okay, we'll take one more question. Nicole, this is for you. It was about, this is from Saida. So thank you for your presentation. I just want to confirm, I guess, the availability of funding within the FCPF for emissions reductions payments. What is the status of the funding for payments?
Yeah, unfortunately, the fund is closing in 2028, so there's no opening for new programs. Now, that being said, the idea is that the bank is engaging with some countries that are showing interest into helping them get ready for participating in other programs. So that's why we have this last fund that I mentioned, scale. No, the process of eligibility is ongoing, but I think that the way to have access to support from the World Bank as a country is to approach the World Bank offices in the country where you're at and express as a government the need. We call countries the client. So we as a bank have to satisfy the requests of the client, and then the country office of the bank there then reports back to headquarters, and then in her headquarters, we have to figure out how we can support the country with that request. Now, that being said, there are lots of other standards that the country can target. One thing is that perhaps you will not get from standards such as ART3s and other standards is this element of support for capacity building and readiness preparation, and that's where the bank can come into play. So the FCPF is not an option anymore, but perhaps there will be other means to that same end, and I think that that's where your engagement with the country office of the World Bank is super important. Yeah, that's regular. Follow the regular conduct, basically.
Excellent, wonderful. Thank you, Naikoa. So that is the end of the presentations and Q&A. If anybody has any other questions or they'd like to speak with one of today's presenters or another colleague from one of the GFOI partners, please feel free to get in touch with the GFOI office, and we can link you up with GFOI's development partners who are active in the region. So thank you to Naikoa, Remy, and Peter for the fantastic updates. An enormous amount of work is happening in Africa, and it's great to see the progress that is being made. And encourage you all to go and look at the MRV dashboard to see, the real numbers that actually represent the progress that the community is making. One final reminder, so this has been the session for Africa. Tomorrow we have sessions on progress being made in Asia Pacific. That will begin at 10 a.m. Central European summertime. It will also include the launch of the new GFOI website. And at the other end of the day in Central Europe, we'll have the update from Latin American countries and the Caribbean at 4 p.m. So you are required to register separately for each of these calls. So if you're interested, please jump onto the GFOI website, or I might ask Madison to pop the links for registration for tomorrow's calls into the chat now so you don't miss out. And then one final plug is many of you will have received information about the GFOI plenary, which is happening in Bali from the 21st to the 23rd of October. This is the big meeting of the International Forest Monitoring community that only happens every 2 years. And this year we're very lucky that we'll also be featuring the launch of the Global Forest Resources Assessment for 2025. That is a typo. Sorry, that should not say 2020. That should say 2025 FRA. And we encourage you all to either join us either online, or if you're able to travel to Bali, invitations are open to members of the GFOI community. But registration closes very soon, so please jump onto the GFOI website and make your registrations for online and in-person presentations. Otherwise, thank you again to our speakers today, and connecting with many of you tomorrow during the Asia Pacific and Latin American sessions. So thanks again. Enjoy your day, everybody, and we hope to connect with you again soon. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.